you very much. It is great to see some of you live and great to have so many people. I think we're at like 80 participants, which is super exciting. I'll introduce myself a little bit and then I'll dive into some content that I've prepared about the personal statement writing process. And then if we have time at the end, would love to like refer back to chat or go live to questions if there's a few minutes left over. So just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, I graduated from Columbia in 2019. I studied political science there, and then I went on to McKinsey, where I was a BA and senior BA for 3 years in the New York office. I started largely as a generalist, so I touched a lot of different industries at McKinsey, and I realized that I wanted to return kind of quote unquote home to mostly public sector, some real estate work. I really liked building things that people can touch and feel. And that have a direct impact on people's lives, or at least where I can sort of envision myself having a direct impact on people's lives. Wanted to continue that thread, but in an international context. So I grew up outside Boston, obviously went to school in New York, had worked in New York for 3 years. I'd been on the East Coast all of my life and wanted to try something different and wanted to sort of put some of my hypotheses about what I'd been learning at work into a new context. And so I picked what I think is the most culturally distinct developed country in the world from the US, and went to China. I just got home 6 weeks ago. I was in Beijing for a year. So I landed in a small city called Fuzhou. I quarantined for 20 days while I was there and made my way up to Beijing eventually and studied as a Schwarzman scholar, which I'm separately happy to talk about as well. It's an amazing, fully funded program that gives you the opportunity to see something really different. And while I was there, I decided to apply to law school. And I was admitted to HLS, which is a dream school for me. I grew up outside Boston. I'd always thought about like how cool it'd be to have a spot in Cambridge, particularly in law school, having studied political science, being interested in policy. And I deferred for 1 year to get a little bit more work experience and to reset after already doing one master's degree. And so I'll be joining the class of 2027 next year. Cool. So let's have some fun to start. If you would like to, and I encourage you all to, because I'm interested in getting some feedback here, head up to the top of the screen where it says view options. There's a drop down to annotate and put a star next to your favorite legal drama. And if it's not on here, I want to hear what it is in the chat, because I have like 11 months until I start law school and watch all the legal dramas to get a little bit of inspo along the way. And full disclosure, I just restarted Suits, and because I finished the latest season of The Lincoln Lawyer earlier this month. So there's been a lot of legal dramas. I'm seeing a lot of a lot of very interesting stars pop up on the screen. I think that there's a stamp of a star that you can also use if it's easier. But I'm seeing a lot of Suits, a lot of How to Get Away with Murder, less of The Good Wife, which I actually also haven't seen. I've seen the first 3, but I've heard good things. Anyone going rogue in the chat? No, a lot of Suits. Okay. Is there anything else beyond these ones for the people? Okay. All Rise and Scandal. Scandal is also a good one. Okay, cool. Super fun. It's good to get a sense of like where people are coming from and maybe a little bit of inspiration for my Netflix queue. So we'll maybe clear the screen, move on to some of the content here, but I'm glad to see that everybody is super engaged. So thank you for that, and keep it up throughout the rest of the session. Awesome. So I'll dive in. A great personal statement, and let me take a step back first, right? Where does the personal statement fit into your application process? Why is it so important? Why is it worth having a whole session just on the personal statement? So there's 3 things that matter the most to your law school application. One is your LSAT score or your GRE score, and I'm also happy to talk separately. I took the GRE and applied with that. 2 is your undergraduate GPA, your sort of ability to show what you can bring to the table academically. And 3 is your personal statement. A close 4th is going to be your recommendations. So your personal statement is part of like the 3 core elements, the 3 pillars of your application. And it's an opportunity for you to answer 3 really important questions that admissions officers want to hear about. 1 is why law? 2 is why you? And the third, which is maybe the one that you might least expect, is why now? So why law is pretty self-explanatory, but think about the counterfactual, right? I'm going to use myself as an example just because I know myself the best. But I was at McKinsey. The typical path for folks at McKinsey is to move on to an MBA program, right? So why law for me? Why was it that I felt that this is the skill set that I wanted? This is sort of the domain where I want to build my career versus doing a business degree versus doing another fellowship program versus doing nothing at all and continuing on the path that I was on. So you want to establish sort of why is law something that's really important to you, a place where you're going to thrive, a place where you're going to add a lot of value. Two is why you, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in detail as it relates to the first question as well. But admissions teams can see anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000 applications for a law school, I think. Think about why your one is going to stand out as part of the 200 to 1,500 person class that a law school is going to curate, right? And there's sort of three elements of this, and we'll talk about them, but I like to think about the hard skills, the soft skills, and the passion that you bring to the table. And the last one is why now? There's a lot of points in your career when you could go to law school. Why is now the perfect moment for you to go? And I want to especially highlight that for a couple groups of folks who might be on the call. One is if you're an undergraduate who wants to go straight through to law school, why should law school take a bet on you rather than waiting for you to get a couple of years of work experience, right? Why do you need to be so quick to the punch here? And there's a lot of great reasons why you might want to do that. You have a lot of conviction that you want to be a lawyer. You want to go make impact in the world as soon as possible. You're on a roll academically and you want to keep it going. Whatever it may be, try to establish why that is. Another one is if you're coming from a non-traditional background, right? There's a lot of profiles of folks who go and do 2 or 3 years as a paralegal and they come back to law school. But if you're coming from what you would consider a non-traditional background for law, consider like why now is the right time for you to make a pivot away from what you've been doing and into law. And we'll talk a little bit more about what why now can actually mean. And across all of these things, I saw a really interesting quote that I'm going to steal from the Leland Coaches Slack channel the other day, which was position your success as inevitable and the institution as an accelerator. You guys are all going to be amazing lawyers one day or amazing in whichever field you choose. Why is the particular institution that you are applying to going to propel you on that journey? But it's not going to be the make or break. You're going to do it anyways. And I think head into writing your personal statement with that mindset when you think about why law, why you, why now. Okay, and let's deep dive a little bit on the why you. And we can go to the next page. So I think there's 3 great traits that demonstrate your potential to be a great lawyer. I talked about these on the last page, but passion, hard skills, and soft skills. And I'm actually going to make my way counterclockwise here. The hard skills are pretty straightforward, and many of you would be able to come up with them already by yourself. You need to be a great communicator, both verbally and written. You need to be comfortable with data these days, right? The questions that lawyers are taking on often involve large amounts of data. You need to be a good researcher. Basically, the things that you've done as an undergraduate that have earned you really great grades, right? What are these hard skills that you bring to the table? The ones that are a little bit more interesting to me are the soft skills and passion. So on the soft skills front, think about how law is a people-to-people business, even if you're doing corporate law, right? You have to convince a CEO why her company is exposed to a lot of business risk. It needs to migrate away from a really profitable revenue stream. Or you're litigating and you need to, prepare your client for a cross-examination on the stand, calm down their nerves before they get up. And everything in between, right? You want to be in policy, you have to think about how to persuade people and how to think about how your argument is going to convince them to take action. So those are some of the soft skills that you'll want to prove that you can bring to the table. And what that means for a personal statement is talking a little bit about your interpersonal dynamics that you've explored in the past or that you've demonstrated an ability to navigate in the past, and how those are going to translate into the legal context. And I'll give you a specific example based on my personal statement for HLS later on. And the final one, and sort of the key that takes someone from good to great, is a passion, right? We all know that law school can be grueling. We know that lawyers work long hours, but they also have immense power, and they're in a really privileged position to often be some of the very few people who are credentialed to do the job that they do. And so what's the passion that you're going to bring to the table? How are you going to wield that power? What are the issues that really drive you and that you're going to sort of use this to do good for in your mind? So across all three of those things, and sorry for background noise, I'm in New York City, if you cannot tell. Across those three things, you'll start to answer the why you part of the personal statement. So when you get to brainstorming, kind of think about what you bring to the table across these three elements. But I wanted to go a bit deeper there because I think it is quite important. And the why you is really like the meat of a personal statement. Cool. We can move on to the next page. So let's talk a little bit about how to pick a great topic, right? Picking a great topic is half the battle. Like that brainstorming process, it should start a long way ahead of when you actually submit your application, right? And I am a big fan of passive brainstorming. So say this week you want to come up with a topic, rather than sitting down for an hour and being like, think, take a walk every day and see what comes to you day one on one route versus day two on a different route, et cetera. But I like to think about like sort of passive brainstorming. This is a good framework, I think, that can help guide some of your thinking as you sort of enter into this process of selecting a really good topic. And oftentimes you'll come up with a few different ones, right? And then you want to narrow it down until you get to one that feels really strong. So a great topic is memorable, unique, not obvious, and reflective. I think those are the four big pieces that I would remember. So you want to be memorable because admissions officers are people too, and they're reading a lot of different personal statements. You want to be the X person. Like, were you the person who overcame this incredible challenge? You volunteered for the military in your home country when your country was in crisis, and you led 8 people through, a really difficult challenging experience. So this is sort of a dramatic example, but you do see like this is one that often comes up. Or were you president of a club when it was facing an existential financial crisis, and you're the person who knows how to navigate something like that. But think about like, who are you as like the X person that's going to stick in their mind. You also want it to be unique to you, right? You want to think about sort of what you bring to the table that no one else does. And maybe it's a combination of different factors, but think about what's sort of going to make you stand out from the crowd across both of those dimensions. And then you want it to be not obvious from your resume. It can absolutely be an experience that's included on your resume, but you want to take advantage of the personal statement to round out your application, not to restate things or drive a point home. Admissions officers, especially for law school, take really careful note of your whole application. They'll have looked at it in depth. Try to make sure that you're building additively and you're not restating anything. And then finally, be reflective. Think about, how has an experience impacted you? Have you changed from this? How are you going to sort of like use this experience or whatever your topic it is that you're writing about as a lawyer down the road? Think about what comes to mind on those walks when your mind wanders a little bit, and figure out how to get that into sort of like a succinct package that's introspective for a reader. So there's a few questions that I like to think about that'll guide you as you sort of like start on this journey. Thinking about a time that defines who you are today. So if you remove this day from your life, we just did like the Men in Black thing and it's just removed from your memory, it's gone. Are you a different person? Apply that to a month or a week or whatever period of time, but think about what's really defined who you are today. What are the biggest challenges you've experienced? What's a low that you overcame? Or on the flip side, what's an accomplishment that you're most proud of? And you get the sense that some of these are kind of behavioral interviewee, but that's because they sort of tend to draw out really interesting stories. A really common one for law school applications will be, what's the cause that you care about most, and what led you to care about that? And finally, none of us have gotten to where we are without other people's help. So you could think about who's had a really big impact on you, why, and how has that sort of channeled you towards spending your life being a lawyer? Is it someone who fought on your behalf and you want to instill that sense of empowerment in other people? Something like that. we can keep moving. So let's get tactical and think about like what the shape of a personal statement tends to look like. There's no rule here. I'm just going to preface all of this by saying they're examples, they're thought starters. There's no hard and fast, like if your personal statement doesn't take this shape, then you won't get admitted. But there is sort of like a recipe that has proven to be successful in the past, and that might be helpful for you as you think about starting on this journey. So often there's a particular sort of narrative arc that a personal statement will take. So it often starts with an opening story. Think about that first paragraph when you go on a website and you see like, oh, admitted student to X. Oftentimes it starts with this opening story that puts you right into the action, right? And then over the course of the rest of the essay, you have to address those three big questions that we talked about: why you, why law, and why now. And it doesn't need to necessarily be in that order, though I do want to focus on why you in particular as being especially important out of those three. And ultimately, you want to bring it all home by tying it back to the original story that you mentioned, right? So this original story should be sort of threaded throughout your essay in a fashion that sort of takes one example that's really specific and expands on it to show why you need to be a student at, University of Texas Law School next semester, and why they're going to be really happy if they take a bet on you. And so I'll move into a little bit of an example, and we're making good time, so we should have plenty of time at the end for questions. On the next page, which I think is a little bit of sort of my personal statement that I wrote. And so I'll give you a little bit of the background context on this. I know there's a lot of words on the screen. You don't need to read them all, but the bold parts are what I want to hone in on in particular. So I started my personal statement thinking about what makes me really unique as an applicant. And I just spent 3 years doing nothing but working for McKinsey, spending a lot of time on my projects for different clients. And I was thinking about like which projects have led me to move away from wanting to do an MBA or to go into the business world and to want to instead go into law. And I thought about like which project had resonated the most with me, which one had been most important, which one was the one that, like, when people asked what's your favorite project you did, the one that I would choose in response to that question. And so I came up with this one that I thought like really defined the sort of breadth of the work that I did when I was at the firm, right? Oftentimes we think of McKinsey clients as being super buttoned up, white collar shirt, Fortune 500 companies, executive levels. We're hunched over laptops in some office building somewhere, right? But that wasn't the case on a couple of my studies. And one in particular, I think, really rejected that notion of what it means to be a consultant and what kind of experience that I had. And it was one that really pushed me to want to be a lawyer. It sort of like renewed that excitement about wanting to be a lawyer. And so the opening of my essay really focuses on bringing in that narrative in a way that grabs the reader because it's sort of surprising, right? Imagine it's 2020 and you're working remote and you log on to Zoom. Who would you expect to see? Like I had mentioned, someone who's more buttoned up, right? Instead, I got someone who had face tattoos, had on a fitted hat that was backwards. And it wasn't exactly what I was expecting when I signed up for McKinsey on the first day, right? And so this juxtaposition kind of brings in the reader, but it would prove to be the most consequential. And this is why I'm writing about it, right? My client, whose name was Miguel, revealed to me that there was something wrong about a system in America that I wanted to contribute to solving. And in the course of serving him as a consultant, what I realized is that I had both the hard skills and the soft skills to do it, but I didn't have the legal training to really sort of take my impact on his life to the next level. And so that's sort of like the setup of what I'm going to talk about, right? You get like this one sentence that's in the middle. Miguel was hardly my typical McKinsey client, but he would prove to be the most consequential. That's sort of like the main draw in to what's to come for my personal statement. And on the next page, I start to dive into the second, third, fourth levels of the arc that I had shown earlier, right? Let's talk a little bit about why me. Well, in this passage, you'll see I demonstrate a little bit of the hard skills, right? I threw the full weight of the firm into the project. I distilled a complex service model, and also dove into some academic research around regulations and the psychological science behind childhood trauma, right? So I'm bringing out a little bit of like that schooling, the ability to navigate the academic world, the communication skills that are really important of a lawyer that we highlighted, if you remember, on sort of that three-pronged page. That is like, why you? What makes you a particularly good candidate to be a lawyer? And I'm also talking a little bit about the soft skills, right? I built a trusting relationship with program participants, not just the program participants that you would expect me to build a trusting relationship with, but folks who are just weeks removed from prison sentences, right? In a very different position in their lives than I was, but I'm showing the ability to connect with a diverse audience, right? And acknowledge the fact that just because we have different lots in lives doesn't mean that there's some barrier between us. I want to be in a position to help people. And I identified an opportunity to do this and committed to it. So all of this is sort of getting at like the hard skills, the soft skills, and then where is the passion, right? And I think it's maybe not bolded here, but the passion is in the first sentence, right? Miguel's story infuriated me. And I think of law, like what drove me to law is like a couple of things. I think of it as like offense and defense, right? Offense is I'm super interested in economic development. I think New York City needs more housing, for example. So I want to understand how to do a real estate transaction from a legal perspective. I want to understand how to make and understand zoning laws, things like that. That's like creating more opportunity. There's also a defensive perspective, which is like, how do we protect people from inequities or problems in the system that we think exist today? And this is, obviously just my opinion, but that's where some of the passion comes into this essay. And I chose to write more from the defensive position of like, I want to be defending individual people from things. And you'll see in my conclusion, I talk a little bit about like ultimately wanting to transition into, a more policy focused role. But what I really want in the near term out of this law degree and why I have that passion is because I'm infuriated by, the situation of somebody that I served when I was a consultant. So that sets up a little bit of the why me. So the why law. So why can't I just do this as a consultant? Why can't I join a nonprofit? Why couldn't I just move over to my client and help them from that perspective? Well, because I identified an opportunity for a lawyer to add sort of outsized impact, someone who has the credentials of a JD, who has a legal training, who knows the laws, who knows the books, to actually be in a position to overcome some of the inequities in the system in a way that I couldn't do if I didn't have law school. So you can see, like, I want to get to this point. I'm going to have this impact, but like, in order to have this impact, I need to have this law school education. And I need to have this law school education because it's going to bridge what I already have, which is like a really strong skill set, to like the opportunity to actually put that into practice, right? So we have the problem solving skill set, we have the consulting toolkit, whatever, we have the interpersonal skills, we've demonstrated that, but we don't have is the credentialing to actually go represent people in court, right? So that's a little bit of like the why law in this essay. Such legal interventions not only would have created a better outcome for Miguel, but also a better one for society. And if you back up a little bit, right, a lawyer could make specific suggestions that like somebody else couldn't with the same level of authority, right? And then the why now. The why now I actually saved for my conclusion. And this is like an abridged example, right? So it's a little shorter than like the full length of my essay, just to save your eyes. But I like to bring out the why now as like the call to action at the end, right? And I approached it from two different perspectives. One is like what's going on in the world and what's going on in the second is what's going on in my life. So what's going on in the world, right? I believe that we're at a critical inflection point, right? I applied right as the US was sort of emerging from the depths of COVID in 2022. Marginalized populations were doing a lot worse than they had really been doing for many of the earlier stages of the 2000s, right? I also managed to work in American cities, right? I'm coming from having been a quote unquote cities and infrastructure fellow at McKinsey. It's kind of bringing the whole story full circle here. And I also talked a little bit about like the way I used my early career. So I've used my early career to develop the skill set. And what's sort of implied here is like, and now I need something more. And that comes in at the end, right? I believe it's critical for me to approach these problems from a lawyer's perspective. So how I package the why now is like, there's something going on in the world that I want to address. I have this skill set, but I need something more to take it to the next level to be able to really like address the problem that I've identified in this essay. And that ends up being able to answer all of the different questions, right? Why you, why law, why now? As I weave in this story. And so you can see like in between the M dash here, working class immigrants in East LA, right? This is sort of like a reference back to the people that I had been serving as a consultant. And you can see like throughout the story, there's this character, Miguel, who's used as a person who really inspired me to be a lawyer, to protect people, to defend them, to advocate for them as a lawyer. Cool. So I think we have like 10-ish minutes, if I am correct, for a few questions. And I'll maybe take a quick look at the chat because there's a couple that are there now. What does work experience mean in between? And please do like toss in some extra questions or just raise your hand and ask live if you have additional questions on the personal statement. Does work experience mean in between undergrad and law school or work experience overall? So work experience typically means between undergrad and law school. Do you have work experience as a full-time employee of a company? And increasingly, if you look at the stats, law schools are looking for this more and more. So if you're considering like what path you want to take to law school, if you're considering maximizing your chances of getting into a certain law school, the majority of applicants these days, and the majority of admitted applicants in particular, have work experience. There's a few different like work experiences that I think lend themselves really well to law, but what I would sort of suggest for people is like, do what you're passionate about. Law schools love when they have a diverse cohort, not just paralegals. Paralegals are great because they bring sort of a level of familiarity and fluency in legal terms and legal thought and a level of conviction about being a lawyer that other people don't. But there's value in whatever you're interested in coming into law. If you've worked in tech, the future of law is learning how to govern AI, right? In big tech platforms. If you've worked in finance, like think about regulations around the finance industry and how important those are and how important creating like a fair financial landscape is for many Americans. If you worked in academia, that's a great way of showing that like you have the academic chops to handle the rigor and course load at a really top law school. So think about the ways that you can pursue your passions with work experience. I don't, pursue the path that makes the most sense for you, but work experience is largely viewed as something that's a positive. Okay. What kind of story level of creativity should we use? Can it be a story from when we were younger? Or is it more recently better? So this is a good question and one that comes up a lot. If you're using a story from when you're younger, and I mean like not within the past 3 to 5 years, it should be a really limited part of your essay. Maybe that's the story that you use to grab the reader's attention. It's, the story of how your family came to the US. It's the story of, when you had this like really ultimate achieving moment in middle school when you did like X, Y, and Z. Great, but it should only be like a very limited part of your essay. Your essay should really be focused on like either something you've done recently or who you are now because of it. Is it beneficial to go to law school in the state you want to practice in? I think it depends. So it is beneficial to go to law school in the state you want to practice in if you're going to a state law school. So if you want to practice in Texas, going to the University of Texas is great because the network that you're going to have coming out of the University of Texas is going to be much stronger in the state of Texas than it is if you go to Colorado. Not to say that there's not still a great network, et cetera, but like there can be some benefits of going to to school in the state you want to practice in. Once you start talking about like T14 law schools, so the really top tier of law schools in the country, usually the brand name is like strong enough that you'll find a strong network and strong people will view it very favorably no matter where you are in the US. How many pages should we aim for with a personal statement? Your personal statement will be like 750 words. That's the same across everybody. So when you're crafting your story, how do you stay on that fine line of the story impacting you versus getting caught up spending time talking about other people who impacted you? That's a great question as well. So if you choose this story where like there's a we involved or there's somebody else who impacted who impacted you, and then you want to talk about how that's developed you into the person that you are today, you'll want to think about how every sentence drives back to a story about you and your success and how you answer those three questions. I got this advice from a social studies teacher in 9th grade, and I think it's true, but it's every single sentence you write should drive your point home. It should have a purpose in explaining why you, why law, or why now. And that will help you talk a little bit more about like what has been the impact on you rather than talking about someone else. If you're talking about someone else, keep it pretty limited to just like objective facts. Here's what they did, and then bring it back to, and that's what it did for me. Maybe another fact, a little vignette about what happened, and bring it back to you. You want to spend, definitely upwards of 50%, probably a lot more than that, talking about you, not about someone else or something that happened. You want it to be about like how something is influencing you as an individual. Cool. And I think someone has their hand raised. Maybe Julia, if you want to ask a question live.
Hi, yes. So I know you kind of touched upon this already, but I was going to just ask if you have any advice about actually writing the story itself, because I feel like I can already answer like the three whys, but it's harder for me to actually come up with like, for me personally, there was not one big moment that made me realize I want to go into law. So I'm having a really hard time with that aspect of the personal statement.
Yeah, great question. And this is an exercise that I'd like to do with clients when I work with them on personal statement writing. But think about all the questions, go deep on a few of your experiences. So the way I would start is start in bullets. This is how I write every essay. I start in bullets, right? And just brain dump a few things that you want to include in your essay. Like, I like this little piece. I like this little piece. It doesn't matter how they're going to fit together. I like this. It talks a little bit about my hard skills, and it's a really good example. I like this that talks about my soft skills. And then go into each and ask yourself, like, why is this relevant? Why did you do this? Why is this going to make you a good lawyer, right? Really interrogate yourself. And it's really helpful if you have someone do it for you. So if you can do this in a way that's like structured or led, right? And they'll lead you to talking about a little bit more like, what are the things that actually will jump out to a reader? And continue to like write that down, write sub bullets under your bullets and get deeper and deeper, and then go back and sort of shave out the things that are not like top tier. You want to get down to like 5 bullets in total. And then think about how those bullets fit together into a story about you. And that's sort of where you can start, how you can start to like begin this writing process that is a personal statement. And I haven't said this yet, but I'll say it now, which is like the writing process for a personal statement is like ultra iterative. Like the number of V1, V2, V3, V4 I have on my computer from going through this process is crazy. And I think the sometimes it feels like, oh, I just spent all this time writing a draft. You need to believe that that's actually a super necessary part of writing the essay. You will write a draft that you just scrap, and that's not wasted time. That's moving you in the right direction. So hopefully that gives you a sense of like some strategies and some mindsets that you want to be in as you actually translate from like why you, why law, why now. And you might start with your bullets, just 3 bullets answering those questions, and then figure out like, how do I connect one to another?
Yes, thank you so much. It's very helpful.
Cool. Cool. I see a couple people are wondering about weighting a personal statement compared to undergrad GPA and LSAT score. It varies depending on the institution. A lot of schools place different measures of emphasis on different things, and it depends on what it is too, right? If you have a 4.0 and a 180 LSAT score, but your personal statement is lacking, they might orient a little bit more towards like, are your writing skills as good as they seem on your academic transcript, right? Think about how it all fits together. The application is really like a holistic piece, but there's three pillars that people sort of will focus on in particular, and it's those: what is your undergraduate GPA, what is your LSAT score, and what is your personal statement, and what did they say about you as a person. So if your undergraduate GPA is a bit lower than maybe the average applicant, there's a couple things that you can do, right? One is have your recommenders talk about how strong you are as an academic. That's one. And have more academic recommendations, right? So have professors talk about, no, you are really capable. And two is you might want to emphasize like an academic experience in your personal statement that you think was really meaningful for you, or growth that you had over the course of your college journey. Maybe your grades got better over the course, and like because you flunked Calc 1 doesn't mean that you don't deserve to get to be a great lawyer. Itzel has a question.
Hi. I was wondering, for your one-on-one coaching, if I already have a personal statement and I would like to like schedule a coach session, would you be able to help me like connect my personal history and my current volunteer experience? Because I've had a few people say like there's a gap. So I was wondering if that's something you offer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and I'll let Erica and Dalen talk a little bit more about like the process and what coaches can offer. And but personally, I work with folks on sort of the full personal statement writing process, right? So from end to end, thinking about from topic selection all the way through brainstorming, execution, iteration, across the full set. So happy to do that. I think I'm getting a few questions that I just want to be the last ones that I answer, and then anything else, reach out to me on Leland, book some time, send me a message. We can have an intro call if there are things on your mind about how we can work together. But one question I'm seeing is like, are there things that are off limits in your personal statement? You want your personal statement to be about you. If there's an experience that you've had that is unequivocally what's shaping why you want to be a lawyer, I think it's what you should write about. You want to be truthful to yourself. You probably do want to be careful about trauma sharing and do what feels comfortable for you. Keep it professional. And think about the fact that like this is akin to an interview setting, right? So you want it to be professional, but you also want it to be like the true story of who you are. And ultimately, I think this is another thing that I'll pull from the Leland Coaches Slack. You're done, you've picked a good topic and you've written a good essay, when if you get more feedback, you're like, no, this is 100% genuinely me. This is the best version that I can do. And, you might not get to that point where you're like, this is 100% perfect before you hand it in, but that's sort of what you're working towards. And if you feel like you're working in the right direction towards that based on the topic that you have, then I think you're in a good place. I'll hand it back over to Erica. If there are any other questions, do reach out. Let's chat individually, or I can also potentially, think about doing more classes in this area as well. But good luck to you all on your applications. And I was really excited, and it was great to meet all of you.
There we go. I was muted. Thank you so much, Kian, for your insight, for answering everyone's questions, for what you shared today. Everyone, if you want to drop a thank you in the chat, we're just super grateful for your time. Kian's an extremely busy individual, coach, professional, and so making time tonight to teach you all for free is a great gesture, and I hope you learned a lot. We have the QR code here. Dalen also dropped his link in the chat. Definitely reach out. You can schedule a free intro call. They're 15 minutes to learn more about his offerings, how you can work together. There's a whole list of services that you can purchase with him, from, the letters of recommendation process to the actual personal statement, whatever it is that you need as you're on your law school application journey. And then he's also offered an exclusive discount for all attendees today. So make sure to take note of that so you don't miss out and you can use it towards your first session. With that, one last announcement we want to make. We just dropped a scholarship that Leland's putting on for $5,000. Scan the QR code. Dalen will drop the link. If you are a current undergrad or high school student, would be great if we had some high school students on this call. I would consider them very ambitious. Make sure to sign up. It's a very easy prompt. There's no essays involved. So just wanted to put this out there if it could be helpful to you and anyone in your network. And finally, thank you for joining. If you haven't already, make sure to scan the QR code to sign up for Leland, where we'll notify you of more events, more resources, and more opportunities to connect with our expert coaches like Kian. So go ahead, reach out to him, and we look forward to seeing you on our future events and working with you on this law school application process. Take care, everyone, and have a lovely evening.